Chowdhary. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of EarthSense and a professor at University of Illinois, Urbana Champaign. And with me is Dr. Chinmay Soman. He is the Chief Executive Officer of EarthSense. And we're here to tell you about EarthSense, the company, and the robot TerraSentia. So this was my first time to the Middle East, really. Chinmay has been here a couple of times, but this is my first time. So I was just walking around, and I saw this. This is near the Corniche, right? So it's literally flowers in the desert, right? And it blew my mind. Because, I mean, agriculture here is really difficult. I'm a professor of agriculture engineering, right? And you have pretty much everything not going other than energy, right? There's dry soils, very harsh weather, but seems like in the Middle East, we have amazing things like this, right? So, food is being grown, food security is a big concern, and there are good solutions that are being brought and from this conference. So, what I'm going to tell you about today, a little bit about the robot that we have here and how it can fit into the UAE story for agriculture. So, to begin with, just to introduce myself, I'm a professor of engineering. I'm in the Ag and Bioengineering department, but by nature I'm a roboticist. I work on autonomous robots. So this is an example of some of my work in the past. This is an airplane that flies before and after this wing drop fully autonomously. So after the wing drops, it doesn't know about a wing drop, it just knows that an event has happened, and after that it kind of adapts its control system to take into account all of the different things that change about the airplane after it kind of goes through that massive failure. So more recently, about 4 years since, I've been working on this problem of agricultural autonomy, like taking all of this intelligence that we have developed in drones into making useful products for agriculture to bring agriculture to the next generation. And we do a lot of things in this area. But what I'll tell you first about is this robot TerraSentia. This was particularly designed for high throughput phenotyping. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what high throughput phenotyping is and what the robot does, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it can mean to agriculture here in the UAE. So I don't know how many of you knew here, but corn, which is basically everywhere if you go to the Midwest in Illinois, never existed in nature, right? We started with this plant that looks nothing like corn, and we selectively bred it into the corn that we have today. And this was done in the South America. And if you may know that under the South Pole, there is a seed bank of all the cultivars that relate to high throughput grains. So the process essentially, is of selective breeding. And we know and understand that we need to accelerate that process of selective breeding so that we can come up with the next generation of plants so that we can feed the world. So in order to do this, what plant biologists do is that they solve the so-called G by E problem, right? So on the one side you have all the genomes that have been sequenced for all the plants and animals that we care about. On the other side you have environment, which includes things like treatments, water, and other things. And what you have on the right-hand side of that equation are phenotypes, or what is known as traits. So the job is to find out which traits correspond to which genomes, which genotypes. So which phenotypes correspond to which genotypes. Once you figure that out, you have a more scientific way of breeding, right? So this is called as phenotyping. So in order to do this, the scientists run these very massive experiments, and this is not just folks at the university, but big companies like Syngenta out there that does it. There is Monsanto, there is KWS, there is Pioneer. All of these people run these very massive experiments. So this is about an 80-acre field, and those blocks are 3 by 3 meter plots. In each of them, they have planted a different variety of sorghum, and sorghum is an energy crop. And they're trying to decide which one is doing better, right? So the experiment setting could be, which variety of sorghum is more drought tolerant. So that could be the phenotype that they could be measuring. So, but the big bottleneck in all of this process is that all of those measurements are done manually. So for example, this person here is counting plants, and this is time consuming. These folks here are counting the height of the plants. So this is not only time consuming, but fairly inaccurate. and that person there is counting the width of the plant. So what they're trying to do is kind of basically get an estimate of the biomass by taking the count, the height, and the width. This gives them an idea of the biomass, and then they're going to try and decide which plant is doing better than something else. If, for example, they're trying to breed for drought tolerance. So how do we automate this? Right? So some options here include something like this gantry. This is at the University of Arizona, if I'm not mistaken, and they actually work on drought tolerance. And that's a great system if you have access to that type of capital. But it's kind of auto forwarding. But you know, not everybody can afford that. This is in the millions of dollars. Other options include drones. Drones are great, but drones they can cover a lot of area quickly, but they cannot see under the canopy, which is where all of this interesting data is. So what we really need are robots, right? Robots that can go and count these phenotypes. But this is a hard problem because fields are very large, right? So each of those are 80-acre parcels of land. Data that you get from robots looks nothing like benchmark data sets, and you have to be autonomous in these really difficult environments. So what we've been doing at EarthSense is trying to solve that problem. Right? So this is our 2018 version of this robot that you see here. This robot's called TerraSentia. It's a compact unit that goes in between the rows of crops, so allowing a whole new level of precision for agriculture. And not only can it just go, but it can do useful things. Like in this case, it's counting the plants that you know as it goes through. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about this robot. So the robot's right here, and we'll be around after this demos if you want to come and see. But the robot has 2 LiDAR sensors. There's one here, one at the back. 3 cameras that are gimbal stabilized, 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a 4th camera here that's looking up. The robot can be autonomous. Under the camera, I'll tell you more about all of its features. And inside the robot is a fully functional i7 computer and several other computers so that you can process the data and talk to it. So the robot is autonomous. So this is an example of the robot driving autonomously using GPS waypoint guidance. So in this case, basically what the user does is the user drives the robot once along the track that they want the robot to drive, and then the robot basically follows that track, right? And using that RTK GPS that's on board. Now when you go under the canopy, really close to the plants, right, GPS is not really that reliable because the signals are bouncing off of all the plants before they hit your antenna. So you start losing accuracy of the GPS. So in that case, our robot can drive autonomously in between plants using lasers, which are basically LiDARs, which is essentially a radar but with little lasers. So in this case, so you can see here the robot's driving through a row of corn. That person there is just taking a video, is just checking out how the robot's doing. And the most interesting thing is, as it's driving, it's collecting the data and it can do useful analytics with it. So in this particular case, as the robot's driving, it's looking at plants and it's kind of tracking them, right? And so that it can basically count the number of plants. So we can cover, we can basically go about a mile an hour. So we can just like zoom through the fields and count all the plants in this stage and also in later stages. So this is an example of plots that I'll show you. And these plots are really simple to understand. On one side, on the bottom is ground truth, which is the human measuring. And on the y-axis is the robot count. So if everything's around the 0-axis line, it's pretty good. So this is another example of the phenotype. The robot is driving through and estimating the width. So just basically, this is a lot of the breeders really like this type of capabilities because it literally converts their plants into numbers. This is an example of the robot going through and counting the number of weeds that are there in this cornfield. And the robot enables completely new type of analytics because it gives you access to under the canopy data. So this is a 3D reconstruction of the canopy using the lasers that are on the robot. So as the robot drives, it collects all these LiDAR scans and you can put them together into this type of a full 3D reconstruction. And so this is again similar types of plots. What I really want to tell you about is not necessarily the numbers, but there's a bunch of plant scientists that have taken these robots and they have gone out and done a bunch of experiments and they've found that the robot is a lot more reliable in counting all of these things than humans, because there's not a lot of variance. So here what you see is that the people mean has a higher variance than the mean of different robots going through the field. So there's a lot of possibilities with these robots, right? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand it over to Chinmay, who's going to talk a little bit more about applications to UAE agriculture. Do you want to use this?
Thanks, Girish. So, with our vision of agricultural robotics and machine learning, we've started with the objective of making better crops. So, in UAE type environments, obviously breeding crops for drought tolerance, for growing better in the local soil conditions and weather conditions, that's extremely important. But long term, there are many more challenges that we can solve with completely new approaches to agricultural intelligence and agricultural automation. So UAE, of course, and other regions in the Gulf experience these very unique set of challenges. So either, it's extremely impressive the kinds of agriculture that's done here. Either growing large-scale crops in open field environments in the desert, or smaller, vegetable and fruit and all those kinds of crops in shaded environments. But it's going towards what I like to call sort of the conventional Western agricultural systems, right? Using massive equipment, spraying lots of chemicals, and while that system has been extremely productive, it also leads to some unique sets of challenges. So one of the most important parts of conventional agriculture in the West is the use of herbicides to control weeds. But wherever that's been practiced, and you'll notice sort of the US, Australia, Canada, Brazil, China, those regions are experiencing extremely high levels of these super weeds that cannot be killed by any kind of conventional chemical-based herbicides. And that's a problem that's not just an inconvenience, but in fact, in the US and Canada, recently people have projected that failure of these chemical herbicides is going to lead to almost half yield loss. And that's not a small number. In corn and soybean, that amounts to about $43 billion a year just in the US and Canada. So that's something that I think we do not want to get onto. Obviously, there are big advantages of doing conventional agriculture. The mechanization and scalability of that agriculture is extremely high. But on the other hand, it's also expensive in terms of the equipment required, and that's not applicable really to a lot of the developing world agriculture that we heard a lot about yesterday. And of course, there are many other issues of sustainability. So it's not just herbicide resistance, it's also water use, it's soil erosion, soil quality loss, and all kinds of other environmental and economic issues that arise from this large-scale row crop annual agriculture. Of course, on the other hand, we have the potential of growing food a lot more sustainably, as well as productively, using these agroforestry type environments. And that's nothing new that I'm telling you, right? In the UAE, this is a picture of Wahat Alite, right? So this is traditional Arabian and Emirati wisdom that's led to a long-lasting, sustainable, and highly productive ecosystem. But those kinds of systems are not really applicable to conventional mechanization. So that's our long-term vision at EarthSense. We're starting with crop breeding, which is a few tens of millions of dollars in annual expenditure. We're moving on to weeding, which is a few $billion. But really, ultimately, what we want to do is long-term, ecologically sustainable, and regenerative forms of agriculture, such as forest gardening, such as oasis gardens, that conventional wisdom has enabled. But we want to make them a lot more efficient and easy to manage with entirely new forms of agricultural autonomy and intelligence. So we think that that's the real way to achieve food security and sustainability. And that's what EarthSense has been working on over the past 3 years, laying the groundwork with many collaborators around the world, and with our extremely talented and hardworking team, we've come this far. And the question is, how can we work together with people in the UAE to bring this technology to an even greater level that's applicable to the unique challenges here. So I'd love to talk to all of you afterwards. We'll have the robot around for you to play with, and looking forward to the conversations. Thank you.